It's school time again, and just like activity around that, the real estate market is buzzing. So we're going to break down all things real estate and dive right into the numbers. As always, Ruben, what's going on in the real estate market today? What are we going to talk about?
We're going to jump into, what are some more recent trends in the market and what are some scenarios? We talked about it a bit at Mega Camp. We're going to break it down a little bit more on like 3 important scenarios we think everyone should understand and kind of how to recognize them as we go forward.
When we look at that big picture, what's the most likely of those 3 scenarios that we might be running into?
So, I think Gary described it pretty well, the first scenario. So we'll kind of kick back actually to a clip of him describing it, and then we'll kind of like break down what it really means.
So here's the first scenario. First scenario is unemployment is below 5% and interest rates fall to 6%. What's going to happen is home sales are probably going to bump. That's a very likely scenario, by the way.
Right now, that's the scenario most consistent with projections in the marketplace.
So that conversation with Gary sounds positive. It's definitely bringing us into a better place next year than this year. It seems to be following along the lines of things are going to get better, but it's going to be slow.
Yeah,
Would you agree?
This is sort of what the most likely scenario is right now. It's what a lot of the projections are based off of. That leaves room for home sales to improve, but not in any kind of like
fast.
rapid fashion, right? So that's about
slow but steady.
4.5 million home sales next year, which is a good improvement from this year, but it's still, we're not back to 5, we're not back to 5.5 or 6 million home sales like what we'd like to be, right?
Right.
So in the long run, it's probably the best case scenario because it does at least damage to the economy. We get out of it, and then maybe 26, 27 is when we start getting back to like normal.
Okay,
right?
Good to know. And then the next scenario is definitely a little different than that, right? As far as the speed at which it moves.
And this would be what we'd call a normal recession, and that is unemployment bumps on up to 6, 7, or 8. Okay, interest rates begin to fall, meaning that the second the government sees people not having jobs, they take action. They're going to start dropping those rates. They will get very aggressive. Right now, if they can get to 6, 6.1, 5.9, anywhere in there, that's probably where the Fed is hoping they can go. Okay, but home sales, by the way, they would jump dramatically in 2025, folks.
So in this next scenario is essentially the Fed waited too long, and now there's an upward trend in unemployment that they have to get ahead of. They're going to start to drop rates more aggressively than they would in the first scenario. And in that case, we'll see interest rates probably falling to 6% or below much sooner. And that's going to lead to a better housing market in the sort of medium to short term.
Gotcha. So still not light speed, but faster than the other scenario. And maybe a little bit better news for us in the real estate industry, not as great of news for the economy overall.
Yeah, so there's a well-established historical trend in that with the housing market, which is we tend to lead the economy into recessions, but we also tend to lead them out. So the recession, if it does materialize, then as the rates are dropped aggressively, we're sort of the engine that the Fed is going to kickstart. We're so responsive to monetary policy stimulus, and we will then be potentially hitting above, back into the 5 million home sales range as we sort of drive the economy back out of the short recession.
So we heard number 1, slow but steady. Number 2, scenario number 2 really leads us in a good direction for real estate, maybe not so great for the economy as a whole. What about the third one?
So this is kind of the most scary scenario, right? This is 2008. This is the savings and loans crisis. Things Gary has, weathered through his career. So let's hear what he has to say about it, and then we'll jump back into the details.
Last scenario, and that is we have a banking recession. And by the way, the commercial real estate industry might lead us into it. This is a wild card, Rosie, because you could literally see what's happening in the commercial real estate space. And if all of a sudden there's defaults, there's problems, the banks are heavily invested in lending on commercial real estate. So anything that disrupts the banking industry, and interestingly enough, we were talking about this, most recessions are tied in some way to the banking industry, aren't they? The money industry, if you will. So again, unemployment could get really tough, right? It could head on up there to 7-8% or higher, right? By the way, I don't know that interest rates go to 3 or 4, but I do believe that they would be bumping around 5, 4.9. And so what actually happens, you're sitting there going, wow, well, if interest rates were 4%, you guys, wouldn't we just clean up? Not in 2025, you wouldn't. You might in 2026. You might in 2027. But you wouldn't clean up in next year if that actually happened.
In this scenario, something's gone wrong with the banking industry. We're in what's called a banking crisis. Financial markets have been significantly impacted. And essentially what happens is it's going to slow down lending. In the event we see, home sales continuing to fall as mortgage rates continue to fall, and we're hearing news that something's gone awry with banks, that's when we kind of know we're kind of in a potentially worst case scenario. Now we're looking at home sales dipping below 4 million for, potentially a full year or more. Unemployment's probably peaking closer to 10% than it is to 6 to 8, like we talked about in the other scenario. So this happened, in the 1980s. It was more of an extended sort of thing in the 80s with the savings and loan crisis as that worked itself out. Another situation where essentially falling home prices, weird practices in banking led to problems, and we had tons of bank failures. It happened again in 2008, right, with the housing bubble pops.
So we've seen it before.
Yes, this is not new. This is not an imagined scenario. We've been here, but it's rare. It's happened a couple of times in the history of our country.
Right. My hope is that we hit one of those first two, of course, and even if we hit the third one, then something else is going on, is what I'm hearing you say. Something bigger than the real estate industry itself, and there's not a lot that we can do to control that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the most likely scenario here is, we're transitioning into lower mortgage rates. They're going to come down probably slowly. It's going to be a bumpy path down as the Fed kind of feels its way through all of this.
Right.
And home sales will start to improve, but it'll be, slowly over the next many months, and probably more into 25 and then 26 will we see home sales starting to hit levels that we probably all would consider more normal.
Thank you, Ruben, for bringing such great detail and information that we all need to understand, not just for real estate, but as people living in this country who want to see it do better and want to be influencing things in the right way. I think all of our real estate professionals would do best by understanding this at a deeper level. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely.
I love it. Well, thank you as always. And thank you for tuning in and learning more about what's happening in your environment. Whether you're a consumer or an agent, you're welcome to come back every single month. We hope to have you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a minute of all of those changes and seeing which one of those scenarios end up happening for all of us over the next few months.